How do you respond to nervousness before a game? Whether you are at the start of a game, a start of a race, a start of a tournament, what do you do when you notice yourself feeling nervous? The way we respond to the nervousness that we feel is going to be the determining factor of whether or not this nervousness negatively affects our performance or whether or not we are able to play in spite of this nervousness. So what I want to talk to you about is how you can respond to nerves once you notice they are present. Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, mental performance coach and the founder of SuccessStartsWithin.com. Those feelings of nerves that we get right before a game begins, they are completely normal and natural. And one of the worst things that we can do is try to fight that feeling of nervousness. But have you ever experienced yourself thinking, I wish the nerves weren't there. I've got to get rid of these nerves. I never play well when I'm nervous. That's the type of thinking that I used to have before every single baseball game. And what I quickly realized was that I was anxious about being anxious. I would feel that feeling of nervousness in my stomach. I would notice that my heart was racing extra fast. Then I would focus on it. I would fixate on it. Then what would end up happening is my thinking would mirror those feelings of nerves, right? So then my thinking would turn into, I wish I wasn't nervous. Then I would start to think about how I don't want to play poorly in this game, how I hope I don't make any mistakes. Sometimes I would wonder if other people could tell that I was nervous, and that would make me even more stressed. All of this was a negative response to those initial feelings of nerves. What we have to recognize is that when we feel nervous before games, we really don't have any control of the nerves we feel at that moment. What I mean by that is the nerves are a natural physiological response. And if we get fixated and caught up in trying to get rid of those nerves altogether, well, what ends up happening is we only make the nerves worse because we fixate and focus on them. And then we are not focused on what we need to be focused on in order to go out there and play well. Now, once again, like I just said, this is something that I experienced a lot, but it's also something I come across in a lot of the athletes I work with in one-on-one mental coaching, which, by the way, if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one coaching, I've put a link to learn more in the description below. Now, last week I was talking to a young cross-country runner, and he was describing to me how he feels nervous at the starting line of every race. Before he gets to the starting line, he doesn't feel too many nerves. He's confident, he's gone through his pre-race routine, he's feeling good. But as soon as he gets to that starting line, all those nerves come rushing in. And what do you think happens once he notices all those nerves come rushing in? Then his thoughts mirror the feelings of nervousness. So then he starts to think about how he's got to keep up his pace. He starts to think about what's going to happen if he runs poorly. He starts to think about all those races he's had in the past where he's gotten nervous and then didn't race well. His thoughts start to become more and more anxious in response to those initial feelings of nervousness. So what he and I were talking about last week on our coaching call was how we have to make sure that we respond consciously to feelings of nervousness in a different way. So I talked to a lot of athletes about something known as the thought, feeling, action cycle. And this really describes how our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions are all interconnected. And most importantly, how our thoughts are going to drive the type of play we have because our thoughts are impacting our feelings and our actions. But when we look at this feeling of nervousness that we experience pre-game, and then we liken it to this thought, feeling, action cycle, what we see is that our thoughts are creating our feelings and our thoughts are creating our actions, but it's a cycle, so each feeds into one another. So once you notice yourself having these feelings of nerves, right? So you're feeling nervous before a game. If we don't try to step in and have a different reaction, what we know will happen is that our thoughts will mirror those feelings because the feelings of nervousness will drive more nervous thoughts, right? So now I'm nervous about the game, therefore I think about how the game will go, and more often than not, I will have anxious thoughts about not wanting to mess up. If we know that that is the automatic pattern or cycle that's taking place, we want to step in and say, okay, well, how would I want to think differently? Because the truth is, while our feelings do really drive our thoughts, right? If I'm feeling nervous, it's more likely that I'm automatically going to have nervous thoughts. It doesn't have to be that way because our thoughts are under our control. And the way that we respond to something is also under our control. That doesn't mean that it is easy to do, and it doesn't mean that it is easy to control, but it is something that we can control. So what I was talking to this cross-country runner about was how when he notices those feelings of nervousness, he wants to try to have a different mental response. And so then we were discussing how would he want to think at the starting line? How would he think if he was feeling confident? And also, how does he need to think to help himself feel more confident? So then he was telling me things like, I would think that I'm prepared for this race. I would remind myself that I just need to make sure that I get a good start and I keep my pace. I would remind myself that I just need to stay present throughout the race and not start to compare myself to the other runners. Do you see how different those types of thoughts are compared to the initial thoughts he had in response to the feelings of nervousness? That's really what we want to do when we notice nerves at the beginning of the game. Now, I've made a lot of different videos and I work with a lot of athletes on this idea of how to reduce nerves. And whenever we're working on reducing nerves, it has more to do with how we approach the game in the first place, right? So the way that we prepare throughout the week, using some visualization, using breathing exercises, those will help us as we lead into the game to have less nerves. But once we notice nerves in the moment, right? So I'm about to start the game and I notice myself feeling anxious. I feel nervous. We don't want to concern ourselves at that point with eliminating or getting rid of those nerves. We want to focus instead on our mental reaction to the nerves. So once again, what I mean by our mental reaction to the nerves is what types of thoughts are you having once you notice yourself feeling nervous? Are you allowing those feelings of nervousness to trigger more anxious and nervous thoughts to where, just like me, now all of a sudden you are anxious about being anxious and nervous about being nervous, and you just, you go down this spiral and you have this pattern of anxious and nervous thinking that translates into stiff and tense play? Is that how you're thinking? Or are you noticing the feelings of nerves and then helping yourself go down a different path? So you start to have better thoughts, more confident thoughts, thoughts about how you trust yourself, how you know that you're prepared so you can go out there and you can play well. Those are the types of thoughts that you want to make sure you have in response to your nerves. It's not always the easiest thing to do because once we notice ourselves feeling nervous, it is natural for us to have nervous thoughts. But we have to remember that our thinking is going to impact our play because if we have nervous thoughts, anxious thoughts, we'll probably end up playing stiff, tense, and holding ourselves back. While we cannot fully control the feelings we have in the moment, right? Once those feelings of nervousness are there, we cannot fully control them. What we can control is our mental reaction to them. Have better thoughts, have different thoughts, and then focus on the way that you actually want to compete. So tying this back into the cross-country runner example, he focused on having a good start. So he focused on his pace at the start of the race. And then throughout the race, he just kept focusing on his pace and focusing on the way he needed to run, instead of being stressed about what the result is going to look like. We know that the feelings of nervousness drive nervous thoughts. We have to step in and we have to try to have different thoughts in that moment. Ahead of time, choose what kind of thoughts are you going to have when you notice those feelings of nervousness are present. Don't fight the feelings of nervousness. Just accept them, and then let's have these different thoughts, focus on a different way of playing, and that's going to help you play the way you want to play in spite of the fact that you're feeling nervous at the beginning of the game. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training. And if you're interested in one-on-one mental coaching or any of the sports psychology programs I have available, links to those are in the description below.